I'm your host, Meryl Johnston. The Lifestyle Accountant Show exists to help today's accounting firm owners build successful firms while also living a healthy, happy life without sacrificing sleep, your weekends, or time with loved ones. Today, I'm chatting with Christine Oliver. Christine is a Senior Managing Director at Ankura, where she provides expert evidence in a wide range of commercial disputes. Prior to joining Ankura, Christine was a partner at a Big Four global accountancy firm where she led their Australian dispute advisory practice. And before all of that, she was a graduate accountant with me at BDO Melbourne.
But look, there are trade-offs as well. One of the things actually, this is a day job thing that was different about being at KPMG versus being at Ferrier Hodgson. Not once did I ever have in my entire time at KPMG, I never had a client ask me to basically validate my expertise.
Today, I'm chatting with Christine about what it's really like to be a partner at a Big Four firm. What sacrifices will you need to make along the way to become a partner? What are the expectations of you when you're there, and how does that tie to compensation? How is your performance measured? What sort of salary can you expect? How does the buy-in process work? And who should consider becoming a partner at a Big Four firm? And more importantly, who shouldn't? It's not right for everybody. Christine also talks about the reason that she decided to leave the Big Four and instead move to a private equity-backed commercial disputes firm. Christine's got an interesting perspective. Prior to being a partner at KPMG, she was a partner at a boutique firm called Ferrier Hodgson. And so she's got a unique perspective where she's worked and been a partner across a boutique firm, a Big Four, and now a private equity-backed firm. And so she's got some interesting insights in comparing and contrasting what those different firms are like. All that and more coming right up on the Lifestyle Accountant Show. Are you worn out by the complexities of sales tax? Or maybe just tired of constantly picking up the pieces when software messes up? It's time to embrace a better way with Tax Valet. Tax Valet's sales tax compliance suite handles everything for you, from data prep and filings to managing audits, all for one simple, easy to understand monthly fee. Tax Valet is looking to form meaningful relationships with accountants who truly care about their clients' experience and want to partner for the long haul. We've been recommending our B Ninjas clients chat to Tax Valet about their sales tax requirements for years. If you're interested, check out taxvalet.com, that's TAXVALET.com, and check out their partner program. Remember, with Tax Valet, it's not just about making sales tax easier, it's about making your life easier. Christine, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Meryl. Good to see you.
We were chatting off air, and it's been a number of years now, but we were actually grads together at BDO in the audit division back in the day.
I know. It feels a very long time ago now.
Your career's changed direction since then. I'd love to get a bit of background. The purpose of the podcast today is to talk about your role as a partner in a Big Four firm and then your decision to move on from that. But I'd love to get the backstory, the history of how you ended up there. So what happened after your time in audit at BDO?
Yeah, so, and you were probably around for this. So, as many people do, I did enjoy my time in audit, but I'd got to a point where I just didn't feel like I was learning as much anymore. There's only so many ways you can test a debtor is real. And so I wanted a new challenge. I wanted to do something with the skill set I had, and I was okay to take a sideways step. You might recall, at least at that time, I was pretty ambitious, so I didn't really want to start over.
I remember.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll cover that later. I didn't really want to start over, so it was, where can I take the skills that I've got and reposition that into something? And forensic was just such a great fit. I just happened to bump into someone who worked in a firm that it specialised in corporate restructuring, but it had a forensic division. They were looking for someone, and as they say, the rest is history. I'd joined that firm with a view that I would be there for about 3 years and probably get bored of that and move on. And it just sort of goes to show, when you sort of find something you love and working with people that you love as well, that it can really change sort of both the direction of your life and your career. So I ended up at that firm for 12 years. So that sort of starts putting my age into perspective, I suspect. But so I was at that firm for 12 years before we merged. Well, we used the term merge. It was really an acquisition by KPMG, and that's how I ended up being a partner at Big Four. So I went through sort of most of my career and most of the trajectory towards partner, and even became a partner at the previous firm, Ferrier Hodgson. So, yeah, so as I said, I had this sort of view I was going to be there for a short time and ended up there for a really, really long time. And
I knew you were ambitious from our days. See that, the burning ambition. And you mentioned that you thought when you moved to Ferrier Hodgson that you might only be there for 3 or 4 years. Was your goal always to be a partner somewhere?
Yeah, I thought so. And it's funny how you look back on your former self. And look, to be honest, I say this to a lot of people. If you don't look back on your former self and go, oh my God, what were you thinking? There's probably not been enough personal growth there, right? Like, I actually think it's not embarrassed, but I think we all should sort of look back on our former selves and feel a little bit uncomfortable, because that's, I think, a sign that you've grown. But look, certainly when I was early in my career, I probably thought I knew a hell of a lot more than I did. And equally, I looked at the people that, were leaders in our team and thought, why can't I, I think I can do that, and why not? So yes, it was to, basically go as far as I could. And I certainly thought that, I was capable of being a partner. And so that was the goal.
And could you describe a little bit more about Ferrier Hodgson? You've described it as a boutique firm. What size, how many people were there, how many partners?
Yeah, so at the time of the KPMG merger, I'm going to forget how many people there were. There were probably sort of about 150, that sort of number, or about 27 partners across sort of pretty much all states bar Tassie. So yeah, it's a very solid boutique size. That would be, certainly same size as some of your smaller mid-tiers, but it really only did restructuring and forensic, a little bit of management consulting, but that was sort of 1 or 2 people. It was really predominantly a restructuring firm.
Well, I think we can have an interesting conversation with you, because we can compare and contrast what it's like being a partner at a boutique firm and then also at a Big Four. So I want to start with what the pathway was like to becoming a partner. And I'm going to reflect, I was only at BDO for 3 years, but I remember looking at the managers and the assistant directors, but they were called directors there, and they were working their butts off. So they were there, they were doing the late nights, they were putting in the hours, they were managing the staff. And then I remember some of the partners, on the outside, it looked like they had it pretty good. They were off golfing, they were at events, they were bringing in the business, they were doing sometimes quick reviews because they were relying on their team. But I've heard since, 15 years later, with friends in the industry talking about, oh no, they are working their butts off, long hours. So what was it like in reality?
Look, I think the answer is if you're doing it right, it's probably more the latter. And look, certainly I'm not a golfer, so that's kind of not me. And yes, there is actually a lot of going out and what looks like socializing with clients or potential clients. But to be honest, that's actually hard work. You're not there to have fun. And to be honest, after you've put in, 9 or sometimes 10 hours in the office, the thought of, having to go and, go to an event and you have to be on and you have to be in a great mood and all of those sorts of things. Like, again, from the outside, it can sometimes, I'm not saying it's not ever fun, but that's part of the job and it is work as well. So yeah, that's absolutely right. There are long hours involved sort of necessarily. There are certainly things that you can do to find balance. So probably not the case at the moment because I'm effectively running a startup. And so that comes, you've done that. So you kind of get what all of that comes with. But, you can find balance. So my sort of rule at both at KPMG and Ferrier Hodgson was it had to be sort of really bad before I would work a weekend. So I'd quite happily work late at night. That was fine. There were certainly, a fair few late nights, but the way I found balance was, I get to a point on Friday, the laptop closes. I'm one of those weird people with a work phone, a personal phone. Work phone goes in a drawer. People can get me if they absolutely need me, but otherwise weekends are off. And that's sort of how I found that time to kind of step away, become a 3-dimensional human as opposed to someone that works all the time and then, fire up again on Monday morning.
And when you say late night, what does that mean? Because I think that can mean different things to different people too.
Yeah, Yeah, look, in my space, it's highly variable. So, unlike audit, which has a busy season, and you'd remember this, it would be sort of pretty regular during busy season that we would work 9, 10, probably every night during that period. Certainly not like that in my role, because the work is a lot more spontaneous and it's a lot more reactionary. So, look, I'm not going to lie, there are nights where I might have to work until 1 a.m., but they're pretty few and far between. But 7 o'clock's not uncommon. It really depends on sort of what's on. There are occasions where I get to finish at 5, but they're not all that frequent, and it's normally because I've got some sort of client commitment that I've got to go to. If I'm knocking off, I'll call it the day job at 5.
And so when you're a partner in a firm like Ferrier Hodgson, what does the decision-making process look like? Because as partners, you're essentially business owners, but there's quite a few of you that I imagine are required to get to consensus on different things.
Yeah, so it's, again, different firms are structured very differently. So at Ferrier Hodgson, for most of the time I was a partner there were 4 of us who were partners in the forensic accounting division. And we had a fair degree of autonomy to make decisions about that business. And largely our senior partner actually hates leadership roles. And so the way it tended to work was the remaining 3 of us kind of as a group would make decisions, and 3 is a great number to make decisions with. As long as you don't end up with a dynamic or it's the same 2 against the same one all the time. And we certainly didn't have that. It was always sort of a different combination of people. And we had a great amount of respect for each other as well. And so, yes, you'd be on the minority side of, some decisions from time to time, but you sort of, well, I don't love that, but, I'm going to let that go because I know at some point later I'm going to be in the majority. I'm going to want the one person that's sort of the odd one out to do the same thing. So we kind of made decisions that way. But if it was anything that sort of affected the whole firm, like people policy or things like that, then those decisions were made by the executive committee. And our executive committee had 4 people from sort of each of our state offices, plus a 5th wheel was their sort of technical role. But, that was how we made decisions that, about, for example, parental leave policies or something like that was firm-wide. And so if you wanted to influence those decisions, you had to make sure that you were speaking to, both your state rep, but also, the other state reps, because they were the ones that made those decisions.
So what would be an example of a decision that you could make, the 4 of you? So I imagine that's things like hiring and firing. What would be some of the other things that you're debating between the 3 of you, if not the 4 of you?
Yeah, things like how we would structure an expert's report, or we actually had a fair degree of autonomy about, and even this is going back a long way. I know it doesn't sound unusual now, but at the time, we had sort of pretty good flexibility in allowing our team to operate different hours to others. We just happened to be in a team where none of us were morning people for a period of time. And so actually my team, tended to come in somewhere between sort of 10 and 10:30. That wasn't a policy that applied to the rest of the office, but kind of applied to us. We were also doing kind of the national thing long before COVID as well. And so that was a decision we made to resource our jobs from people, regardless of the location. And that was a decision we could make independent of what the rest of the firm was doing. So, yeah, things like that. And then, sort of technical things, how we train our team. Those sorts of things.
And I've always been curious as well, because as partners, I imagine that you're all or mostly revenue generating. So the incentives are for you to be focused on your clients and your teams and building the business, but then you're also operating a business. You're in the business of, in this case, insolvency. But if you're working on policies about parental leave or marketing the firm, that's taking you away from your client base and being revenue generating. So how do you manage, I mean, how does that business, or how do you think about managing those different trade-offs and incentives?
Yeah, it depends on the business and kind of what the role is and how it's valued. So certainly at sort of a smaller firm, you rely a lot more on your non-client facing staff to do a lot of the legwork for you. And so, for example, on parental leave policies, most of that sort of the work in that would be done by, our then, as it was called, human resources team. and then it was just the decision-making part that was usually done by partners. Towards the end of my time there, we went through a big sort of, again, it seems to be a buzzword now, wasn't at the time. We did a big strategy transformation looking at sort of how we pivoted the firm, both in terms of sort of direction in the market and also I think sort of modernising the firm in some ways. I had a role in sort of implementing that strategy internally, but that was an explicit role, and so there was an acknowledgement that part of my role was internal facing, and so basically my KPIs were adjusted to reflect that I was spending significant time in the firm. If you sort of pivot to a bigger firm, then it's sort of, again, sometimes your KPIs are adjusted, sometimes they're not. And it's about you making that personal decision about kind of, is it worth it? From a values perspective, from a business perspective, from an individual perspective, does this role make sense for me? Or, particularly in a bigger firm, there are a whole bunch of other people. You don't have to do everything yourself. So sometimes sort of stepping back and saying, actually, this isn't the role for me is the right thing to do.
This podcast is brought to you by A2X, Automated E-commerce Accounting. I'm the founder of B Ninjas, which is a specialist e-commerce accounting firm working with brands in Australia, the US, and UK. We've tested all of the e-commerce accounting tools out there, and A2X is a core part of our tech stack. I'm going to share an example of how we use A2X with one of our clients. This particular client sells swimwear, which they manufacture in Asia and sell in the US. Their sales channels are Amazon and Shopify, and they had a recent challenge where they were trying to get accurate financials for a loan and were struggling with this. When they moved over to B Ninjas, they wanted accrual accounting, but previously their prior accountants had only done cash accounting. And because of that, it was difficult for them to show an accurate gross profit and net profit figure when they were presenting their financials to get the loan. This was mainly because of the lumpy stock purchases. Moving over to A2X and using the cost of goods functionality meant they could move to accrual accounting. We could then help them prepare their financials faster, and ultimately they were successful in securing a loan. So if you're an accountant with a client on Shopify or Amazon, then make sure to check out A2X to automate some of the accounting work.
Let's transition now to what that merger looked like. So you've gone from a boutique firm and then you're acquired by KPMG. And I'd love to hear about that whole process.
Yeah, look, that was interesting. And look, not to give myself a pat on the back, I was on the merger committee for that. And to be honest, I think we did a pretty good job. I think the key to that success, the success of that, was making sure our people had spent, and again, we're all talking pre-COVID, but had spent real quality time with each other before day one. So it wasn't sort of that everybody turned up and, of course, we were a lot smaller than KPMG was, but in terms of the spaces we were going into, certainly in my space, we were actually sort of in the two offices that we had forensic in, which was Melbourne and Sydney, we were actually near on about the same size as the existing KPMG team. And so, yes, we were the ones going into the big firm, but, in terms of the space we were in, it was a little bit more a merger of equals. And so, yeah, having everybody have met each other and interacted in a sort of a low pressure way was absolutely key, rather than having everyone turn up sort of going, who are you lot and how do we work with you and all of those sorts of things. But, coming in as a partner, very, very different. Certainly in the bigger firms, you go, the background checks you go through, you sort of feel like you're getting ASIO clearance. It's just extraordinary, which was interesting. And yet just, understanding how the whole firm works, it's so much more complicated than when you've got 27 partners to get through. They're about somewhere between, and again, it sort of fluctuates, but, sort of 650 and 700 KPMG partners, right? So the scale is just completely different.
So if you could compare and contrast being a partner at the two firms, what would you say in terms of the day-to-day for you? Were there some similarities? Were there some big differences?
Yeah, so similarities are kind of like, what I'll call the day job. Look, the processes for achieving some things are a little bit different. Like conflict checks, for example, are very, very different in a big full service firm to when there's 27 of you providing sort of 2 or 3 services. But sort of beyond that, it was things like how your performance as a partner was sort of measured, how you got feedback, how you were remunerated was a bit different. What else? Decision-making structures were different. Like, again, it's probably unsurprising when you have 650, 700 partners as part of one firm, you do have a lot less decision-making autonomy than you do in a firm where there are a lot fewer of you. And that's sort of for 2 reasons. One is kind of the formality of the decision-making structures in a bigger organization. But also, even in a smaller organization, if you don't have the decision-making authority, you probably have the relationship with the person that does. And that can often make it, even if you're not the person making the decision, if there's something that you're really passionate about, there's often a way to achieve that. It's obviously a lot harder in a bigger firm because the decision-making authority might not sit with you. It might not even sit in your division or with someone that you've ever met. And so, that can make things infinitely harder if there's something that you want to achieve that's not within your remit. But look, there are trade-offs as well. One of the things actually, this is a day job thing that was different about being at KPMG versus being at Ferrier Hodgson. Not once did I ever have in my entire time at KPMG, I never had a client ask me to basically validate my expertise. Not once. You just walk in I know it sounds silly, but you just walk into a room and people assume you know what you're talking about as a Big Four partner. I've met a lot of Big Four partners, not just at KPMG. That might not be the safest assumption in the world. To be fair, most of them are fabulous, but I'm just saying it's not universal. Anyway, my point being that, there are trade-offs, right? The reputation and the brand, although they are taking a little bit of a hit at the moment. But generally speaking, the reputation and the brand is fabulous. Depending on the types of work you do,